Hey, Larry. You probably away from your computer, Strange.
Hey, Shante, how you doing? If you're talking, you're muted.
I was just saying, hey.
Okay. What's good with you?
Nothing. This rain was crazy today, so.
Yeah, I was out there too when it started coming down. How your project coming along?
Honestly.
Sound like we in the same boat.
I'm just honestly trying to narrow down the idea, like my idea. Honestly, like I don't know. I gotta figure something out.
Yeah, I mean, I got my ideal already. Just like how I'm gonna put it together. That's the main thing. So I did get a chance to buy the domain name, like Nicole did.
And then something happened with my domain, so I have to go back. Namecheap, I guess they needed to verify something from me. I don't know why it happened, so I got to go back in there. I'm thinking that this whole time that my domain was up, and it was, but something in there happened, so I got to figure that out.
Okay. Did you get the tic-tac-toe done?
What was that?
The tic-tac-toe project? Did you get that done?
I did get it done, but that last part that he kind of like changed or whatever, it's still, my button is still like, my pop-ups aren't still coming up, so I'm trying to figure out what's that about. Like when someone actually wins, it doesn't announce it, and I don't know if I did. And my problem is I didn't copy his code exactly. Like I have his code, but some of my things are in a different spot. I end up rearranging mine. So I think that's part of what the issue is.
I mean,
and I really don't like really trying to copy his code verbatim, like the exact thing. I want to see if I can figure mine out or put it the way I want, you know?
Right. I mean, if you could figure out the logic and how to code it, you could definitely do your own. I mean, it's more than one way to make the games. I had like Google, so I was trying to make my buttons like the boxes change color. So like if you put an X, it turn blue or something, and if you put an O, it turn red. But I couldn't figure that out. I couldn't figure it out, and I could figure it out like a regular button.
I'm sure the way to make the user create their own color in the beginning of the game by default.
Oh, that's dope.
Because usually when you play games like that, you can pick your color, like, what color are you going to be? I'm red and you blue. So maybe if you look it up in that sense.
Yeah, that's a dope idea too. Instead of X's and O's, you could just use the colors too. So I can get the colors to change on buttons. Like I did like a test one, and I was able to get it done on a test one, but not in the tic-tac-toe project though. So it was crazy. But I'm just glad I ended up turning it in because I can't figure it out. I'm just gonna have to,
And that's my problem. I don't turn in my because I can't figure it out, but I'm gonna just start doing that. So then later on I could just go back and work on it. Cause I don't know.
Like I said, it worked.
Yeah, I mean it do work, but it's just my pop-up won't come up and I don't know why. And I wanted to kind of undo the code I did before and try to, but I don't want to even do that. I just want to go in there and figure out what's
yeah. Not there. Because I actually like did the whole thing all over based on what I already had. So I could like comment it and actually understand everything that was going on. Because at first it was some stuff like, okay, I kind of understand. And that took forever too. Right. So but it's working.
But I will say one thing, and as soon as I'm kind of upset that I didn't catch up on FCC until like a little bit later on, and I'm still catching up on some of it, but and that's what I was just telling him one day in the one-on-ones, that like if we had like those SCCs prior to actually doing these projects, that we would understand the content that he was, because a lot of the FCC basically be stuff we doing in it, and I can understand it when I'm doing it through there, you know?
Right.
And then have us go on and do the project. But let's see how he got it going.
I'm like, it's week 10, right? Yeah, week 10.
Week 10.
Hey, hey, hey.
What's up, Christy?
Not much.
Have you started using your Oculus yet? Or
Okay,
your
so I
Meta?
just came back from Walmart because I bought the thing that goes on the back. I ordered it this morning because I haven't started using Trip. I'm like, I gotta start using Trip.
Have you looked at the Trip?
I did did the demo and I want it, but I didn't want to buy it and then not use it. But because I've been watching so much YouTube, and I'm just like, I gotta get it. Like I need it.
You could watch YouTube in your Oculus.
I know, that's what I'm saying. I can do it. I don't have to just be watching on TV. Plus, sometimes when you're watching YouTube, my attention span is like a gnat, so I'll get distracted. And I think if I have it right in my face, I think I'll pay more attention.
Right. Yo, I actually for like our career coaching stuff for module 3 and 4, because I didn't finish it. So I was like, let me go ahead and finish it today. I watched the video in the headset, and then did the quiz in the headset. So
Okay. Are you familiar with Michael Todd?
Michael Todd, no.
Transformation Church?
No.
I've been watching, he got a series and I've been watching the series. I've been watching so much YouTube.
Yes. You and me both. TODD?
I was gonna send you the link, but Yes.
All right. I'm
It's
gonna
called,
use
it's called cuffing. It's called cuffing season. He's on part 5, but you gotta go back to part 1 and watch up to part 5.
Oh my
Cupping.
God, Michael Todd, Christy.
Yes, ma'am.
Girl, I've been at work listening to him. Oh my God, it's so good.
I listened to 5 this morning. I almost fell out of bed.
I didn't listen to 5. I started watching 5 and then I got stopped. I started watching it
You gotta
yesterday.
watch-
and I stopped.
5 is life changing. You gotta watch 5.
I'm gonna watch it tomorrow, but I definitely listened up to 4 and the piece of 5. And yes, I love all his sermons. He is like that. Yeah.
That's like, I don't even have the words to put to it, but yes, Larry, I'm gonna say go back to, you can watch 5 today or later and then go back and watch 1 and 4, but he tells you when you come on that it's a series. My friend sent it to me and I started watching it on Friday and I watched the first 3 on Friday.
Nah, Larry, you gotta go back and watch 1 and then just catch up to 5. Don't start at 5.
Five was so good. 5 was so
double
good.
speed.
Huh?
I said I just put it on double speed.
No, you need to listen to that.
I don't know. I can't watch stuff
You
on
got to hear
double
what he's
speed.
saying.
Yeah, nah.
I can't watch YouTube videos. Unless the person talks fast, I can't watch at regular speed. I just can't. And I process everything that people be saying. So it's just something. Audio books, everything. Even in life, I be trying to.
Is that the first like series you ever listened to him by him?
Yes.
Oh my God. You gotta
I gotta go back. I know I gotta go back. I know.
The first one I ever listened to was Grace Like a Flood, and I've been hooked ever since.
Okay, that'll be my next one.
So he got like an app. It's like the TC app. And
I downloaded it. I downloaded it this weekend.
Yeah. Yep. You on it, yep. Awesome.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, folks. How's everybody doing?
Good. How are you?
We came back.
I know, right? He returned.
Yeah. I mean,
Mel
it went
too.
well enough yesterday, I guess. So I guess I'm back.
Shout out to Mel for the excellent details that he left for us.
Yeah. Nice work, Mel.
Yeah.
No problem. No problem. Right.
Okay. So, I don't have a good feel on when we've reached quorum, so I'm gonna let Mel or other folks sort of tell me when to get started here.
We just chat. We we don't see each other, so it's just a little chitter chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll give it a few minutes. It's still got students trickling in, so.
Okay, cool.
I had to go look at one of my old Udemy courses for like Postman, because I was trying to do a post or get from Kroger's API, and then it was saying that I needed my client ID, and I put the stuff in it and it wouldn't work. But I don't know, excuse me, I don't know if there was something about a base 64 encoding. I didn't know if I had to encode it in base 64 first, then put it in, or put it, just put the put the thing in the function, and the base 64 function would do it for me. I don't know.
Yeah. Without some context, it would be hard to speculate on that. But there are some parts of HTTP where in certain contexts you base 64 encode things. Yeah, but that's about all I can say, I guess.
I was looking at the bestseller app thing. I'm excited about that because a lot of the books on there I either read or wanted to read, so I was very
Nice.
interested.
That's great.
All right, Ryan, I guess we can get started, Ryan.
Cool. Okay. Let me get my stuff going here then. So share screen. share that. Then gotta turn on the go with that. Okay. Okay. And somewhere too. Okay. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about three things: curl, fetch, and promises. So this is sort of an extension of what we talked about yesterday. And quick review yesterday, we talked about HTTP, the protocol that web browsers use to talk to each other and talk to the web servers. It's the only language web browsers know how to speak. And yesterday we also talked about Postman, which is a tool we can use to make HTTP requests from our computer to web servers, sort of a graphical way we can do that. But today we're going to talk about some other ways you can make requests using other sorts of tools. So these sort of HTTP tools and libraries are utilities that sort of provide nicer interfaces to make requests. It is possible, we're not going to do it in this class, but we have in previous cohorts, it is possible to make HTTP requests by hand, by literally typing out all the text character by character, but it's a little bit tedious. So these tools sort of exist to make your life easier so you don't have to sort of worry about that. You can sort of think at a higher level. You can think about things like methods, paths, versions, headers, bodies, things like that. You don't have to think about literally sort of the low level details of the protocol. So the three we're going to be talking about in the class: Postman, curl, and fetch. We already talked about Postman, and that's a tool you can use to make HTTP requests interactively from a user interface. So from a program you run on your computer. Curl is a program you can use to make HTTP requests from the terminal. It also has another purpose, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. I would guess it's probably out of the three tools, the one you're going to use the least, especially in this class. But it's really important you know some basics about it because it comes up very often. And lastly, fetch, which is probably we're going to use the most. And that's how we're going to make HTTP requests from JavaScript, so from a web page. So obviously we covered Postman yesterday. We're talking about curl and fetch today. Okay, curl. So curl is a command line tool. It's a tool in the terminal. There's other tools in the terminal I bet you've used a little bit of. Things like maybe cd, ls, pwd. Do some of these commands sort of sound familiar, I hope?
Yes.
I'm seeing some shaking of heads. How much terminal work have you guys done?
We've touched a bit on it, just a week,
We
right?
went through CD, changing directories, making a directory, checking what's in the directory. So we did a few things, but you know.
Okay,
That
so
was it.
you would say that you've opened up the terminal before, you typed commands in it. That sort of process isn't completely foreign to you.
No.
Okay, cool. So curl is a tool you can use in the command line in the terminal to make HTTP requests. And the way you sort of use it is a little bit counterintuitive for many people at sort of the first go around. You'll see that sort of it starts with typing curl, curl. And then there's all these sort of like things here that say dash something and then some text, and then dash something and then some text. These are what are called flags, and it's sort of a common pattern in command line programs where you sort of have this dash something, which sort of means like a type of parameter. And then you have some sort of text that often is like an argument that's specified. So in this case, dash x for curl means method. Dash h means a header, and dash d means body. And there's some other sort of longer versions of these flags that you'll see used sometimes too. So for example, this request right here, this curl that I have up here on the screen, this is making a post request to example.com/test. That is a custom header with the key being x my custom header and the value being value, and the body of the request body being optional request body, that string text string. So we're going to going to show you an example of curl here. Okay. If you want to follow along with me here, you're welcome to. So I'm going to open up a terminal just by doing like command space terminal or any sort of other way you'd open up a terminal in Mac OS. I'm just going to start off by typing curl. Make this a little bigger too. Okay. So cool. Curl, give me some little help information here, but we have curl installed and it's working. Curl should be installed by default on every Mac installation. So you should all have it. So I'm going to just start off by doing something like curl http careersincode.ml/fruit. You remember that from yesterday, I'd hope. Now I'm going to hit enter. And that probably looks pretty familiar from yesterday too, I'd imagine. So what I just did is I made a request to careersincode.ml/fruit. Let me do something a little bit more complicated. Let me try to make a post request. So I'm going to do go back over here. Oops, up to here. You can see that like -x, that's sort of how you would do a method of post. So I'm going to do -x post. And yesterday we had that text processing, I think it was like frequencies. Sorry, I'm typing with one hand because I'm holding my mic and it's a little bit challenging. And see, something like that. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to specify a method of post, and I'm going to specify a body. So I'm going to do -d my body here. Hit enter. And there we go. I get something back and I've got all those sort of frequency just like we did yesterday. So hopefully you've been able to follow along here, and I'll give you a little bit of time to try this out in a second here. But I want to mention one thing real quick, and that's it's really important the order in which these things are typed. So if you notice here, I've got the -x post, then I've got -d my body here, and then I've got this sort of URL at the end. You want to make sure you put the post immediately after -x, because these sort of go together. If you did something like -x, this whole -d thing, and then post, that wouldn't work. You have to put them next to each other. Also, it's really important you put quotes around the body. And the reason why is the way that the command line parses things, if you have a parameter that has spaces in it, you have to put them in quotes, just like you would in JavaScript, to sort of tell the command line, this is all one parameter. So if I do something like, if I get rid of those quotes, oops, get rid of those quotes here. You'll see that it's going to do some sort of weird things. It's only going to think the body is my here, and it's not going to think these are part of the body. So it has to be all in quotes all together. So let me just do a quick little survey here. Has anyone been able to make any requests successfully with curl, just trying it on your own?
Yeah, I got the first one, but the post didn't work.
Okay.
The fruit one worked.
Okay, cool. That's good. Has anyone else had success with the first fruit one?
No, can you do it over? Or preferably
Yeah.
the post one, I would appreciate if you.
Yeah. So I'll type the post one here from scratch again. So going back over to our slide here, there is 3 sort of parameters that we need to kind of know about. Really only 2 for the text processing one. Oh yeah, case sensitive. That's really important too. Yeah, all these things are case sensitive. So you need to make sure you make them uppercase or lowercase as needed. Okay, so I'm going to start off by actually, let me open up that homework from yesterday so I can actually have something to reference here. Okay, there we go. So method of post. So if we could jump over here, or not over there, over here. Sorry, I'm getting a little lost. Over here, we can say the way you specify a method when you're making a request with curl is this -x post sort of format. So I'm going to start with that. Curl -x uppercase X. So this is an uppercase X and it's case sensitive. That's really important. Post. Okay, so I've got the method part. Now the path, text processing frequencies. With curl though, you specify a URL. So I'm gonna include sort of the whole URL there. So I'm gonna do http://careers encode.ml/ text processing frequencies. I'm gonna do that. Okay. And then finally, the body. So this phrase here. So if you go back over to the presentation, the way you do a body is you use -d. So I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to arrow key my way over to before the URL. I'm going to just put it in before the URL. You can put it after if you want, but it just tends to normally look a little bit neater if you put all your flags at the beginning, and then you sort of put the URL at the end. So, and also notice I'm putting single quotes around it, and that's to tell the command line tool that that whole section is the body. It should parse that all as the body. Okay, so then I'm going to hit enter, and there we go. Was that helpful for folks? Okay, I'm seeing some shaking of heads and some thumbs ups. Okay, cool. I'm going to keep moving on then. We're not going to be spending all that much time talking about curl today because I think it's probably the tool you're going to be using the least, but there's one really important reason why I wanted to bring it up. Before we get into that, though, let's talk a little bit about the benefits of curl. Because you might be thinking, okay, this is this weird command line tool. Where am I going to use this? Why is this important? Well, most importantly, I would say curl is installed in every system. So if you open up, or any sort of Unix system, mostly any sort of Mac, it definitely will be. If you open up many systems, you can just run curl. You don't have to download and install Postman. In certain contexts, it's kind of handy. And later on in the module, there'll be certain situations where you're going to be on computers. You're going to be connected remotely to systems, or you won't have access to an interface. You're just going to have a terminal on that computer. So in that sort of context, being able to make requests with that Postman is also going to be kind of important. But those aren't really all that applicable right now. The thing that is applicable right now, and why I wanted to bring up curl real quick at the beginning of all this, is because curl is sort of used as a way by which people often communicate requests to one another. So let's say I'm sort of working on something. I've sort of tried to make a request and it's not quite working right. And I want to reach out to my coworker or my friend and tell them about it so that they can maybe troubleshoot on their own or maybe try the request on their own and see if they have success with it. The sort of industry standard way people do that is by sending curls to one another. It's sort of the way by which we sort of often represent requests. In fact, it's so common that a couple tools we're going to be talking about here provide ways you can both import and export requests to curl. It's sort of like that much of a standard. Just to show you here, I'm going to go over to Postman. I still have one of our requests open from yesterday. There's this button over here in the upper right-hand corner code. If you click on this button, what it'll actually do is take this request here and export it for you as a number of different languages. And the one it does by default is curl. You can also select some other things, which we'll maybe get to later on in the module in the week. But here's what's really cool about this. Let's say I copy this, and you'll notice that some of these flags feel longer. Like I'm using the shorter versions of them, but like request is the longer version of uppercase X, and dash data is a longer version of dash D. But what's cool here is I can now go to File, Import, although I'm actually going to make a new request here before I do that. Okay. So I can go to File, Import, and I can actually, you can see here that there's a couple options of things you can import. And you'll notice one of them is a curl. So I can, plain text, raw text. There we go. Yeah. So I can paste my curl there. I can go to continue. It will parse it and figure out, oh, that's a curl. And it'll make a request for me pre-populated with all that information. So that's really why I wanted to show you curl. Less because I think you're going to use it day to day, but more that if someone sends you a request or you're looking at documentation for sort of how to make a request, it's very common the format you're going to find it in is a curl. And I want you to be familiar with what that is and sort of that you can import it into other tools or that you can just paste it in the terminal and make that request with the curl. So hopefully that made sense. If you're a little crazy like I am and do a lot of things in the terminal, you also might find that curl's a pretty nice little command line tool, but I'm guessing most of you probably aren't crazy in that way, and that's totally fine. Cool. Okay. That's all we're going to talk about curl today. So this is where things, oh, that's nice and illegible. Making HTTP requests with JavaScript. This is where things are going to get more fun. Oh, yes, someone's got their hand raised.
How did you import that into Postman? Did you just Command C, Command V?
Yeah. So what I did is I took, for my example, I just took it from here. I Command C to copy it here. And then, yeah, when I went over into import, I went to raw and then just Command V pasted it there. Are you having difficulty with that?
Yeah, let me see. First time I tried to do it, it wasn't. Yeah, error while importing.
I'm curious, has anyone else run into that issue?
So trying to find the import button.
Yeah, while importing, if you've, oh. I would guess if you're running into that, the reason why it's not working is the curl you're putting in there isn't quite typed out correctly. So maybe one of the flags is incorrect, or one of the parameters isn't quite right. If you'd like to, paste in the chat what you're pasting into that box, and I can take a quick look at it and see if it looks right to me by eye at least. In addition, you should be able to take that curl from the presentation and paste it in there. So at the very beginning, you've got that little arrow and tilde bit right before the curl. Make sure when you're pasting in, you're not pasting in that part. You're just pasting in where it starts with C in curl all the way to the end of the line. Okay, Stephanie, let me give that one a try that you just pasted in. Let's see. if that works. So let's see if it's going to let me copy from copy. Yeah. So Stephanie, it looks like when you enter your curl there, it's sort of particular that the URL is the very end. So I'm going to take your, oh, someone just talking there? Or, okay. Text, there we go. So Stephanie, I'm going to take your curl. I'm going to take this bit, ooh, not that. I'm going to take this bit here. I'm going to put this at the very end. Oh, wait a second. Actually, I see what's going on. It isn't that. You're missing a single quote at the very end. So I'm going to put a single quote at the very end of this last bit here. You sort of had this data section here that didn't have that ending quote, so it didn't really know how to properly parse that. I bet if I put that in and I hit continue, it'll work. Yep, yeah, there we go. That's all it was. Cool. Yeah, so you'll see that like the curls generated by tools can sort of, there's a lot of sort of ways you can illustrate all these parameters. And each one's a little bit different. So I think it's sort of helpful to get a bit of a read on like what some of these things mean, especially as you start to run across these curls and API documentation. They often use the short parameters in the API documentation. So that's why I sort of talked about them. But yeah, it's another one of those things probably with time you'll start to develop like an understanding or an intuition on what some of them mean. Anyway, I didn't want to, oops, not that. I didn't want to spend too much time here on curl because fetch is really where I think you guys are going to have a lot of fun. A lot of fun and probably a little bit of pain too, but that's all in a day's class, isn't it? So making HTTP requests with JavaScript. There's a lot of ways you can make HTTP requests with JavaScript, a lot of sort of tools and libraries, but we're going to be talking about one called fetch. I've mentioned fetch a few times now, but the reason why we're going to be talking about fetch is it's built into browsers. A question in chat, are we revisiting curl later on? Most likely not. It'll probably come up a little bit in the homework a little bit later, but for the most part, I think if it comes up again, it's probably going to come up organically. If you want sort of, or if you have particular questions about it though, feel free to send them to me and I can try to see if I can incorporate them later on in the week. But that's all the material I have for today on curl. It's pretty simple.
What are we, well, it may be kind of simple, but I'm still a little lost.
Okay.
And I just want to know what are we going to be doing for homework? That is it going to be basically what you just did in class?
Yeah. So what the homework is going to be is going to be sort of similar to last night where we're making requests with Postman. There's going to be a few requests you're going to have to make with curl. And also simple is probably the wrong word there. I really meant to say more like that there was it's kind of self-contained. It's not really material that like is going to necessarily carry on into further days in this week.
Okay.
Was that helpful?
I mean, I suppose maybe the homework will help me.
Okay. If you want, once we get to the break, if you want me to go through curl a little bit more, if you got any questions in particular, I'd be more than willing to field them then. Okay. So the reason why we're going to be talking about fetch is it's built into modern web browsers. And it's, for the most part, what people use these days because it's built into web browsers. There's some other options. Max told me he hasn't mentioned to you jQuery at all, which is probably okay in this day and age, but there's a thing called Jquery.Ajax that used to be very popular. There's a package that we actually used last go around for careers in code called Axios. It's pretty popular. There's one called Request Promise, but none of that's really all that important. Really, the point I'm trying to make is that there's a lot of tools here. Fetch is just the one we're going to use. And the thing is, all these sort of libraries, they're all very similar. They all sort of take the same parameters, roughly return the same data back. It's just each one just has its slightly little different opinions about how things are done. So in general, from what you learn from this module, you should be able to sort of figure out any other sort of HTTP library for the most part. It's all sort of all do generally the same thing. Okay, so fetch is a global JavaScript function. So some other examples of global JavaScript functions might be things like set timeout or things like console.log. So these are sort of functions you can use that are built into the browser. You don't have to import, or you don't have to do any sort of fancy setup work for, or like download a package or a third-party script that just exists in the web browser, which is nice. It's kind of easy for us to use in class. So fetch accepts some parameters. It's a function. So it takes some arguments that say how exactly you're going to make the request. And then it makes that request asynchronously and then gives us back an object that represents the data that comes back in the response. So if you noticed yesterday when we were talking about requests, the whole idea, or really the whole life cycle of an HTTP connection, the whole idea of a request and response kind of maps somewhat to like a function call. If you think about making a function call, you're calling a function, you're passing parameters into the function. The computer's sort of doing some thinking, doing some calculation, and then returning data back again, back to sort of the person who called that function. And conceptually, that's kind of similar to what's going on with HTTP. Because of that, it makes sense to sort of represent making a request to a web browser as a function call. And most libraries will do something like that. Okay, so more concretely, here's what it looks like. So the function is literally called fetch, and it takes two parameters. The first parameter being a URL, so just like we did with curl or Postman yesterday. And the second parameter is a bunch of options that you can specify to sort of configure the request being made to a web server. Now, what are some of those options? Well, they probably look pretty similar to what we were doing with curl or what we were doing with Postman yesterday. Things like request method, things like request headers, things like request body. So you specify these as a secondary parameter to the fetch function as an object. So the first parameter is a string, it's the URL. The second parameter is optional, and it's an object. And that object takes a bunch of keys, things like method, headers, data, and then they sort of map to values. So method is the request method, which maps to the value of a string of like get, post, put, delete, these sort of methods we talked about yesterday. Headers is a key that maps to another object where you can put any sort of custom headers you'd like in there in that sub-object as keys and values. And then data is the key that maps to a value that's a string that's sort of the response body data. So more concretely also, like putting this next to sort of that request sort of format we used yesterday, this is how sort of those things map from that fetch call to that request format. So you've got sort of your path at the end of there at the URL, you've got the method, you've got the custom headers, and you've got the body data. So remember how I said that second parameter was optional? You don't specify that second parameter, fetch is going to default to doing certain things. So by default, the method will be get. By default, headers will be an empty object. And body, I think this should actually be data here. But that will default to an empty string. So just empty body data. So if you make a fetch call where you don't actually specify the second parameter, just the first parameter, just as a string, you're going to make a request to that URL. It's going to be a get request with no headers and obviously no body. It's a get request. So that's that sometimes comes in handy, but I would imagine for the most part, when you're going to be making fetch calls, you're going to want to specify both parameters. Okay, before I get to return value, I realize we haven't written any code yet, but conceptually, does everything I'm saying sort of make sense? I realize it's JavaScript, and that's sort of a touchy subject for some of you, but we're going to write some, and hopefully it's going to get a little better.
Hopefully.
I have a question.
Mhm.
What is like when you say when we use fetch and then we put it at the beginning, what is the title of fetch? Is it like are you saying it's a function or
Fetch is a function.
so it's just like using the word function? But
Oh, so let's see, how would I explain this? Fetch is a function that's already been defined for you. The web browser's already defined that function for you. So imagine the function, the web browser behind the scenes has written something like function fetch parenthesis, like, and sort of put the browser's put its own code in that function. And then what you're doing is you're calling that function. So you're writing fetch parenthesis, and then you're putting parameters in there, and then a closing parenthesis. And once you've done that, you've now called that fetch function the browser implemented for you, and that behind the scenes will make an HTTP request for you.
Yeah, because I thought a method that would help me, which I'm not sure if it is, but I thought like understanding the vocabulary of what each thing does. So that's why I just wanted to know if it had like a separate title. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you can think of this conceptually as very similar to like a console.log, where like console.log is a function, and you're calling that function with a parameter. It's just what console.log does is it prints that parameter to the screen. What fetch does is it makes an HTTP request.
Okay, so console.log would make whatever you've done show up in your console. Fetch, being that it's an HTTP request, is going to make it show up in your web browser.
What fetch?
Terminal, right? No.
Oh, what? Sorry, I heard someone talking there.
I was saying terminal. Is it? Do we use it in our terminal, or where do we use fetch mostly?
All in JavaScript. So fetch will use in a web page when you're writing JavaScript code in a web browser.
Okay.
But Chris, to answer your question, I think you have the right idea. It's just instead of it showing up in the web browser, you can think of the action that's being performed, like the action console. Oh, say that again.
Where it's pulling is meeting your request. It's gathering all your information and then presenting it to you. Like
Yeah.
the console.log is showing you what you asked for.
Yeah, I think you have the right idea.
Okay.
It's going to get it. Like when you tell the dog go fetch, it's going to get it. Is that more precise? Right.
Oh, sorry, say that again.
Like when you tell a dog go fetch, it's going to get the information. Is that more accurate?
Yeah. I mean, you can that's sort of what's happening here. The method or the function is called fetch, and when you kick it off, it's sort of initializing the HTTP request or sort of telling the browser to go fetch the results of that HTTP request to get a response. It is sort of a little bit of a pun there, like fetching data, because I guess you're like there's movement to go get it or something. But yeah, it's sort of just what this is just what the function sort of does. It makes an HTTP request.
Okay. I think I understand. I didn't know if it fell under in a category, but what you're saying is fetch is a category. Like fetch doesn't fall in a category. It is a category. So I think I understand now.
Okay, cool. Okay. So I wanted to ask to make sure that what I was saying sort of made sense, because this is where it's going to get a lot more confusing. We haven't talked about the return value of fetch. Actually, before I get too much in this, let me take a quick look through the chat and make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. So we haven't talked about the return value of fetch. So just like conceptually, if you imagine you had a function, the parameters sort of are the things that are put into the request, and the return value are the things that come back in the response. So if you imagine you would maybe call fetch, give it a URL, give it a method, headers, data, all that sort of information. It would then return data back for you, and that return data would contain things like an HTTP status code, return things like a response body. So that's sort of like conceptually how a lot of these sort of libraries work. The thing is, though, fetch is a little bit different, and it's a little bit different because JavaScript is a little bit different. So the return value that fetch gives you back is what's wrapped inside of what's called a promise. Now, I brought up promises yesterday briefly, and mentioned that it would be a thing today. This is something that a lot of students have struggled with in the past when I've taught this, and I want to bring it up because, like, I think a lot, sort of the back half of this class, I'm going to be fielding a lot of questions on it. We're going to sort of go through it a bit. But let me try to do my best to sort of give a high-level overview of why a promise is important. I'll maybe try to answer some questions, and if we're having some difficulty, maybe we'll try to do some examples, and hopefully that'll help clarify. I realize it would be helpful right now to write some code, but I want to get through this whole sort of thing, whole explanation, so we can write code that actually does something, because we've only gotten halfway through it now. So I know, right? I know you're all thinking it'd be great if we could actually write some code right now, but we're getting there, I promise. Okay. So a promise is a way in JavaScript you can sort of have a value that represents a value in the future. Why is this important? Well, when you get a return, when there are certain operations in JavaScript that are what are called asynchronous. Has Max talked to you guys about the difference between asynchronous and synchronous things in JavaScript? No. Okay. That's unfortunate. But okay. Okay. Imagine how am I going to do this here? I wasn't planning to get into this right now, but I think it's worth it that I do get into this right now. So I'm trying to figure out how I should do it.
Right. He went over the set timeout, which was a little bit asynchronous, right?
Yeah, that's an example of an asynchronous operation.
All right.
Okay. But it sounds like that didn't really hit with folks, or there's some folks who there was maybe some confusion there. Okay. I'm gonna do this. You're familiar with the JavaScript console, right? In web browsers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if I type stuff in here, that's not going to be confusing for you, right? And like do some little demos. Okay, cool. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger just so, okay. So let me do an example of a synchronous function. So I'm going to make a new function. I'm going to call it add. It's going to take two parameters, A and B. Okay. There we go. Add A and B. So it should probably be no surprise to most of you that if I do add 3 and 5, I get 8. Like, I would guess that's pretty straightforward. The thing I want to call out here, though, is when I typed add 3, 5 here, I ran this and I hit enter, I got this value back immediately. So what happened here is JavaScript ran this code. It went into this function. it saw, okay, add A is 3, B is 5, and then added 3 and 5, and then returned 8, and then it came back here and it was done. And it just like went through all that, like bing, 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 done. Okay, that's what's called synchronous code. It's happening sort of step by step. Every single thing is happening in the order you expect it to happen in. Now, not everything in JavaScript is synchronous. The example Max probably was talking about was a set timeout. Set timeout is something that often folks reach for because it's sort of an easy thing to demo, but it's often kind of confusing because folks don't have a good practical example of like where it gets used. I'm going to give it a shot, but let's see. I'll see if it lands. So imagine I want to print a bunch of numbers. I sort of want to count down or maybe count up from 1 to 5. And what I want to do is I want to print 1, I want to wait a second, and I want to print 2, then I want to wait a second, then print 3, 4, 5, something like that. So how would you approach doing something like that given what you know about JavaScript right now? Anyone have any ideas?
Set timeout.
Well, yes, but do you have any sort of like, well, let's maybe do
Would
that.
you put a set timeout inside of a set timeout?
You're headed in the right direction, Doug. But I want to work up to that. So let's do it this way. In most languages that are not JavaScript, the sort of way you would handle this is something like this. So you make like a loop, like for I is equal to 0, maybe like I is less than 5, I plus equal 1, or something like that. And you'd like log your number, something like this. And then what you would do is use a function called something like sleep. And say like sleep for a second. So this is like if you, for example, if anyone gets into Python, this is sort of a common thing you would write in something like Python. So conceptually similar to something like what you do in Python. So what you're doing here is you sort of print a number, you'll wait a second, you loop around, you print the next number, you wait a second, loop around, keep doing that over and over and over. Now, obviously, sleep doesn't exist in JavaScript. This is just sort of a contrived, made-up function. But even if we did do this, this wouldn't actually work. Like this wouldn't really make sense. And the reason why this wouldn't make sense is JavaScript is a single-threaded programming language. There's only sort of one sort of like pointer that's sort of running through the code. So JavaScript at one time could only be at one sort of statement, running one sort of line one at a time. So what will happen here, if we run this, this will run. Then we'll say console.log number. Then it will hit the sleep. And what the sleep will do is it'll sort of cause the browser to sort of hang there for a second, sort of like be in this sleep function call, sort of like loop around, like sort of waiting for time to pass, blocking, waiting, till eventually the time passes, and then it'll loop around, and it'll print again. And it'll go back in that sleep, and it'll sort of be churning around, waiting, then around, sort of keep going in that sort of pattern. And that works. The thing, though, about JavaScript is the way JavaScript works, that thread, that sort of single main thread you have, it always, well, you never really want to block it. You never really want to cause it to hang up. And the reason why is if you do that, the web browser or sort of your browser tab becomes unresponsive. In the web browser, if you do that, can't do things like re-render the web page well, or do things like handle browser events like clicking on a button, or sort of, I don't know, like scrolling. So blocking that main thread with something like a sleep that's sort of just like waiting in one place is just not going to work all that well. So for that reason, you sort of have to approach these things differently in JavaScript. And for that reason, JavaScript does things using what's called an event system. So also, like, I don't know how much of this Max has already taught. I'm guessing I'm probably going more in depth than Max did, but I think that's probably a good thing. So I'm going to keep talking. But if anyone disagrees, please interrupt me. Okay, So the event system in JavaScript is kind of complicated, but here's a simple version. What happens is JavaScript starts off and it runs any sort of synchronous code that's sort of it's given given access to. So like maybe you like start off by running a JavaScript file. It sort of runs all the sort of code in the JavaScript file. And then what happens is it sort of like waits, and not like blocks like this, like it just sort of like hangs out and just is doing nothing and sort of like waiting for something to happen. And something could be like maybe you click on a button on a web page, or you click on a link, or you scroll, or you do some sort of action on the web page, or I don't know, maybe some sort of animation in CSS happens. But what that does is that sort of causes the main thread to sort of like wake up and sort of handle that event, handle that thing that occurs. So you'll see like, or you'll notice that the way JavaScript works, it sort of like lives and dies by these events, these sort of like actions that occur in a web page. So I bring this up because this is a really important concept, because if you block the main thread, you can't handle these events. So how do you do something like this in JavaScript without blocking the main thread? And this is where what Doug was saying with like set timeout comes to be really important. So what set timeout does is it sort of does the same sort of thing, just in a more clever way. And that clever way is you've got this sort of event system. You've got these sort of events that get processed. What set timeout does is it will schedule an event at a certain point in the future. And when that event gets processed, it'll run some code. So this is a sort of subtle thing, but it's really sort of important. In other languages, you block the main thread by just sleeping or just sort of like spinning around. In JavaScript, instead of blocking the main thread, you tell the main thread to execute your code in a certain amount of time. So that's a really subtle thing, but it's like really key. One, you block the thread. One, you tell it to run your code in a certain amount of time. So let me sort of show you an example of what that looks like. So obviously, I think Max did the sort of set timeout thing here. So he wrote probably something kind of like this, I would imagine, and maybe something like 1,000 here, and then log, I don't know, something like that. And he maybe ran something like this and said like, okay, well, what happened there is I sort of ran this, and then I got log to happen a second later. And cool, yeah, that's totally what that's doing. That 1,000 means 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second. And set timeout here, it takes two parameters. It takes this first parameter here, which is a function, and the second parameter here, which is a number of milliseconds. What set timeout does behind the scenes when you run it, so this is sort of just like a function like fetch, sort of built into the web browser, just like console.log. When you run this function, it's going to schedule an event to run in this many milliseconds. So in 1,000 milliseconds or a second, it will emit an event. It'll sort of tell the web browser, okay, it's time to wake up and do something. And when it wakes up and does something, it's going to run this code in this function. So it's going to run console.log log, this thing here. So this is sort of how you deal with, how you in practice sort of deal with that, like, oh, I'm going to tell the web browser to run something in a certain amount of time, as opposed to a sleep sort of thing. So, okay, let's try to do our little example of like writing some numbers here that sort of, you have like 1, wait a second, 2, wait a second, 3, wait a second. Okay, so I'm gonna start with this. So I'm gonna begin by up here, I'm gonna do console.log number 1. Okay. And then, so I'm gonna start by logging out this. Then I'm going to schedule an event to execute in 1,000 milliseconds a second that runs this function. In 1,000 milliseconds, once this runs, it's going to run this code right here. And I'm going to log out number 2. So, okay, if I run that, get 1, 2. Perfect. Okay, we're well on our way here. So let's keep going. So how do we log another number 3 in another 1,000 milliseconds? Well, Doug had pointed something out that's pretty apt. And the way you want to do that is by nesting set timeouts. So I'm going to take this here and I'm going to copy that. I'm going to take this, copy that. So I'm just going to put another set timeout inside of the set timeout. And in here, I'm going to do like number 3. So let's sort of run through this real quick before I hit enter and just sort of explain what's going on here. So start out, log out number 1. That should be pretty straightforward, I would think. Then next, we're going to call set timeout, schedule some code to run in the future. We're going to schedule it to run in a second, 1,000 milliseconds. It's going to run this function right here, this whole function. Okay. So once this function runs in 1,000 milliseconds, it's going to log out number 2. Okay. And then the set timeout is going to run. So it's going to run that set timeout. It's going to schedule an event that get kicked off in 1,000 milliseconds in a second that runs this function. And then once that gets kicked off, it's going to log out number 3. Okay, so I'm going to hit enter. We should see 1, 2, 3. There we go. So that's this is a good example of some code that's asynchronous. And the reason why it's asynchronous is you notice when I run this, I don't get a value immediately back. There's sort of things that are happening behind the scenes where like I'm scheduling things to run in the future, or there's data that's coming back that's like I don't have immediate access to. And sort of tying this, oh, Larry, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't trying to stop you in mid-thought, but if you put something after the set timeout, what would happen?
Just about to get to that.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, so that's a really good question. I'm going to do something here. Let's be really obtuse. What do you think is going to happen out of curiosity when I run this?
I think it's going to run before the set timeout.
Well, you would be right. And this is the point I was just about to make, and that's these set timeouts are asynchronous, which means the function in here gets kicked off and run in the future. So because of that, asynchronous code, the order in which it runs is often a little bit confusing. You can't just go top to bottom necessarily and say, oh, the code's going to run in that order. And for that reason, like you'll see here that there's no sort of value being returned here. Like sort of the context of what's being run is sort of within functions, and you can't sort of return something from this context up to a higher context is all that easily. So the order of, so the point I'm trying to make is the order of execution is like screwy and hard to reason about. In addition, so why is this important for fetch? Like, let me tie this sort of back to what we're talking about today. Well, you'll notice that these set timeouts here, they sort of have a property kind of similar to fetch, where there's a thing that's going on that takes some time. An HTTP request takes some time. You got to send data to a server. The server has to process that data, send a response back to the client. That all takes time. I mean, usually milliseconds, but time. And like for a computer, milliseconds is a lot of time. So for that reason, an HTTP request when you're making with fetch is another example of an asynchronous operation in JavaScript. So if I were to, let's say, let's see, how do I want to do this here? Well, okay, let's do it this way. So let's talk about why promises are important, because that's sort of the next step to this, that So the asynchronous part, I'd imagine maybe you're sort of starting to wrap your head around what the difference between asynchronous and synchronous code is. But the promises part is another layer. So set timeout, there's not really like a return value, like a natural sort of like thing you want to get back from a set timeout. Like it's sort of, there's no sort of natural value there that's important. So that's sort of like maybe a bad example, but I think I'm going to sort of jump over to the request example now. So if you're making a request to a server, you need to, I'm going to start typing out a fetch here, but I'm not going to actually run it in this case. Let's say I'm making a request to careersincode.ml, something like this. And I'll say method get, something kind of like this, okay? So I've got everything I need in here for fetch to sort of construct an HTTP request, okay? But the response I get back, it comes back asynchronously. So because it comes back asynchronously, like I can hit enter here, but what it actually gets returned by fetch is like not a, like there's sort of nothing I can return because like synchronously immediately after you run the function, the request is still in progress. Like you haven't actually gotten back that response data yet. You're still like waiting for it to come back. So this asynchronous operation here, there's no sort of synchronous return value that like I can get that will sort of be able to let me like predict the future and say like, oh, well, in the future, I'm going to get like a 200 because it's an asynchronous operation. So I say there's no value, but there kind of is. And this is where a promise comes in. Now, I'm not going to go sort of through all the history of like where promises came from and why they're important. If folks are interested in that, though, I can maybe sort of at the end of the class or some other time sort of give a full-on intro to it. But needless to say, a promise is a way by which you could think of like a glass or like a sort of a container. What you get back, return back from this function is like an empty container. And then once the asynchronous operation completes, sort of in this like behind the scenes, this sort of like function that gets run once that operation is done, it sort of puts a value in that container. And because you have a reference to this container that you get back returned immediately, you can sort of later on look in that container and say, oh, there's something in there that I can then like look at and read and sort of get the status code of or get the body of or something like that. So this container thing, we call a promise in JavaScript. And I'm going to run this here. So I'm going to store this into, I'm going to call it response. Okay. So I'm going to hit enter. And actually, let me do this a little bit differently because I need to come back before the response. Okay. Yeah, there we go. So I run this and immediately back, I get this promise here. This promise thing. And you can see it's pending. It means that container is empty. There's no sort of value that's come back. But eventually, once that data comes back, once that response comes back, that container will contain a status code, a response body, response headers, all these sort of things you can sort of, at a later point, sort of interrogate the promise. So Stephanie says, mine says promise pending, but also errors. And yes, we're going to get to some of that in a second. For now, if you're getting an error, make sure you go to careersincode.ml before you make the request, and most likely then it won't error. Okay. So that was a lot of sort of theory and talking. Hopefully it was of at least minor help. We're now going to talk a bit more about, though, now that there's a little bit of a background here on promises. we're going to talk about how you actually deal with a promise. So you have that sort of container thing. Oh, cool. It worked for Stephanie. That's great. You have that sort of container thing. How do you sort of access the thing inside? How do you sort of get access to that response data later on? Okay. And the way you do it is with this special method called .then. So I'm going to, yeah, here we go. Okay. So I'm over here on this slide. I'm just going to copy this code over just so have some standardized stuff we're working with here. So what is this code doing? Well, every promise has a method on it called .then you can run. And .then takes one parameter, a function. You can think of .then conceptually sort of similar as set timeout as to what's going on. So when you, what .then does when you run it is you give it a function and it sort of registers that function internally in the promise. And what .then means is once a value gets put into that underlying container that the promise has, run the function that you've given to .then with the value in the container. So why this is kind of interesting is it means there's sort of an event here you're subscribing to. Sort of you're listening for when something gets put into that container. And once it does, your code gets run. So what that means is if I hit enter here, you'll see it logs out 200 response.status, the status code coming back from my request right here. So in general, this sort of pattern of you sort of run something, a fetch, you get back a promise, and then you call .then on the promise to register a function to run when the request completes and sort of data gets put into that container. That's a pattern you're going to be seeing a lot of. Max might have also showed you some other fancier ways to do it, but at least for this week, we're probably going to avoid those because I want to keep it as straightforward as possible. Okay, I imagine a lot of you folks probably have some questions. Anything you want to ask me now before we keep moving?
Yeah, I was getting an error as well.
Getting an error when you make the request?
Yeah.
Make sure you're on careers.code.ml when you make the request. That would be the first thing I would check.
Okay.
If it still isn't working, then I'll have you share your screen and we can take a look. I didn't say it explicitly, but if you have a chance, give making this request a shot in a browser and see if you can get back a 200 here. Have it log out a 200 for your response status. And if you did, then you've made your first request in the web browser. So that's cool.
Is there any particular reason you use var instead of like let or const?
That's a good question. So the short answer, no, there isn't. The long answer is, it turns out when you're in the JavaScript console, if you use var, it'll actually let you redefine the variable over and over again. So when I'm writing this out, it's very likely I'm going to run this again to sort of do a demo or show something. And if I had let here, it actually wouldn't let me redefine promise with a let in front of it. But if I have var in front of it, it does let you do it. It's sort of like a little weird like side effect thing. In practice, it's not that big of a deal. And let's really the better thing to use here from more of like a just modern JavaScript sort of convention. But I want to make this easy on myself for demos, which is why I did it this way. Probably way more information than you wanted to know, but.
Thank you.
Yep.
Could we have used the arrow function instead of the keyword function in response?
You can use either. Yep.
Thank you. How do you go to another line without running the code?
Yeah, good question. So you can use Shift Enter. So for example, here, if I type hello, hello, and then I go Shift Enter, my cursor's down here and I can do like world.
Thank you.
Yep. Other thing you can do too is if you type the code in another editor and you copy it and paste it in, that'll work as well.
What, so I got the 200. What does 200 mean?
So remember back to yesterday, we were talking about our status codes.
Yes.
It starts with a 2. So that means it was a successful response. And just
Okay.
turns out 200 means 200 okay, which is sort of the most generic success you can get back.
Okay. And so that was just what we wanted, was the 200.
Yep, that's it.
Okay. While you were
Mhm.
there was a link that we got, and while you were talking, I clicked on the link. I think that was put in the chat. I think I think we did go over asynchronous coding, because I wanted to ask you, does event listener, is that that's synchronous or asynchronous? What is that?
Yeah, so like add event listener, something like that.
That
Yeah,
is-
that's an example of asynchronous code. Yeah, so that's something where imagine you've got like a button or a link or some sort of element in a web page. You can add an event listener for a certain kind of event, and when that event occurs, it will like kick off that function that you've like attached to that event. So what's going on there is it's utilizing the event loop. It's asynchronous code. Those sort of web browsers sort of like waiting for events to occur. And that event happens and it says, oh, there's some people listening for this event. And it sort of will kick off and handle all those functions in the web browser. So sort of the execution pointer will be sort of waiting, and that event gets kicked off and it'll jump to that function and sort of run through all the code in that function. And it'll go back to waiting again.
Okay, so we did learn that, but we
Cool.
kind of learned it at a rate that might have been too fast for absorption, I'm thinking, because
Okay.
I don't think, because I remember seeing, we created tic-tac-toe last week, so I think we did all of this in tic-tac-toe. I don't think it registered that it was That's what it was.
Okay. Yeah. What I'll say is that this is going to be a great week to just further reinforce those concepts, because it's just going to keep coming up over and over with this fetch stuff. So.
Well, everyone, that the link that Mel shared in the chat, click on it and save it for later. It takes you to MDN and it has great information.
Yeah, I will say it's great information, but it's also very dense. So for certain folks, it may or may not be the best like link. I think for those who are sort of following along, it's a lot of really good information though. Generally though, how are folks doing? Have people been able to make these requests? I saw some thumbs up, but I just want to make sure that if anyone has any questions, it gives an opportunity to ask them now. Okay, I'm seeing a bunch of thumbs up, so I think I'm going to call this a success. Okay, so you thought that it couldn't get harder than promises, but I've got one more thing. Sorry. The one more thing I've got for you. Oh yeah, well, I had a whole thing I was trying to emphasize there, but I'm going to skip by that. But one more thing is, there is a, let's say we want to get access to the response body text. Okay, so the data coming back from the request. Now you'd think, okay, there's probably like a response.body or like a response.data or some sort of way by which we can like fetch that information from the response, get that data out of the response. Turns out that there isn't, though. It's not quite that straightforward. And the reason why it's not quite that straightforward is the data you can get back from a response can be sort of in different formats. So maybe a couple examples. Someone could send back just some plain text. Another possibility, maybe someone could send back like a binary image, like sort of like a JPEG or a PNG, like the raw binary data from something like that. And the sort of way you would want to get that information is sort of different in different contexts. Like if it's a text string, you just want that text string, and that's super straightforward. But if it's like this binary image thing, that's going to be hard to like, if you have it as like a text string, that's not all that helpful. You usually want it as like to package it up in some sort of other format. So for that reason, fetch actually gives you some other methods on the response that allow you to access the response body in different ways. The one we're going to talk about today, and probably the one we're going to use for, well, definitely today and probably for the next day or two, is called .text. So the thing about .text is it also returns a promise. So what's a little bit confusing here, or could be a little bit confusing here, is we've now got promises within promises. So walking through what's going on here step by step, this first bit up top, I'm making a request, occurs in code.ml, a get request, I get back a promise. I then attach a function to run once that sort of request completes and I get back a response. And this function runs and I get back a response. Then I log out the status on the response. Then I run the method text on the response, and that returns a promise. That is storing into this variable promise2. And then promise2, I'm then attaching with .then a function to run what sort of the decoding of the body thing is completed. And then once that happens, they'll call my function here in the .then with a parameter that contains the body text content. And then I'm printing out that body text content. So let's give it a shot. Now I'm going to do one thing here. I'm going to change this to an endpoint that should be pretty familiar to you folks. Okay, do that. So I'm going to hit enter. So there we go. We've got 200 apples, oranges, bananas. And we've got our data coming back in a web browser. So give us a shot if you haven't already, and see if you can sort of get this nested promise thing to work here. What's important here, if you haven't already sort of gotten in the habit, is indenting your JavaScript properly. So you notice here how I've got the 2 spaces, and then I've got the 4 spaces here. And what often people will do, especially sort of when they're sort of getting started, is they won't indent their code properly, and they'll sort of lose track of how many closing parentheses and closing curly braces they need. And that sort of leads to harder to troubleshoot errors. If you indent your code, you can make sure you don't do that, because let's say I was missing like this, you can look at that and it's now a lot more obvious because, oh, wait a second, there's nothing that like finishes up that level of indentation. So that would be a tip I would say. I think maybe the only other thing I would say is, well, nah, I think I'll leave it there for now. Give it a shot. Let me know how it goes. I'll give you a couple more minutes to take a look. Okay, folks, how's it going?
Got an error.
What sort of error?
Uncaught in promise type error, failed to execute text on response body stream already read at anonymous 429.
Ah. Would you be willing to share your screen?
Yeah.
Let me stop my share here.
Desktop 2.
Aha. So something I didn't mention that's kind of a key thing is that you can only actually parse the body or parse the response body of a request once. So in other words, you can only run response.text once. If you try to run it again, it'll actually sort of throw an error, and that's the sort of error you're getting. Now, you may be wondering, sort of like, how am I running it multiple times? I'm sort of running this once here, like I'm running sort of this, I'm attaching a function to the promise, I'm logging out the status, I'm then doing response.text, then unpacking that and logging out the text. The thing is, I'm guessing the promise you're running this on, so like the original promise, like that you're attaching the whole thing to, that's something where you sort of kicked off a request. And then now you're sort of running this code against that request you kicked off. The thing is, if you're running this against a request you've already made once, the first time you try to unpack that body, it'll work. But then if you try to run that promise bit again, it's going to unpack the body again and it's going to fail. So I bet if you were to try to make that request again, like the promise part, so do like the var promise or let promise equals the whole fetch bit again, and then rerun the code you just wrote up there, it would work perfect.
Thank you.
Yep.
How do you clear the console so that you can like start fresh?
Yeah, so there's two ways. Probably the easiest way is in the upper left-hand corner. Let me share my screen. There is a little button, circle with a slash through it you can click. The other way, and the way I kind of like, and if you hit Control L, it'll do it too. Not Command L, Control L. Just to sort of show you what was going on there, Larry, let me, if I make a request like this, and then now I sort of run my second part here, that'll work. But if then I run the second part again, it'll probably fail, yep, the same sort of thing. So it's because I'm running this sort of thing again on the same promise more than once.
But I got this fulfilled, and I got the HTML.
Oh, cool. Yeah, you also probably didn't make it to /fruit, so you got back the HTML for the page. But that's totally cool too.
Oh, /fruit. Okay.
Cool. Anybody else having any issues?
Mine says uncaught syntax error.
Cool. Okay. We get to do some debugging.
Yeah, it's telling me it's one of those curly brackets, but I don't.
Do you want to share your
can't
screen?
tell okay, let me see. Share screen. All right, over here. Can you see it?
Ah, yes. Okay.
This one and this one. So maybe I have too many of these. No. Yes.
So there's a couple things I think might be worth for you to try to do. The first thing is, instead of running all your code together, I think it might be helpful if you run each line one at a time. So sort of the first bit there, the var promise equals fetch, sort of that whole first line where you're
okay. Oh, wait a minute. So I'm just going down on this new line.
Yeah, yeah. So start with running that.
Just that.
Yep, just that. Okay, cool. Okay. Now, for this example, we're going to need to get the status code, and then we're going to need to unpack the body as text and then log that out. Now,
This would get me this. I shouldn't have had that undefined in there. So then I need to do the promise then function response.
yep, so that's where you want to start. Take that, copy it, yeah, and paste it in, but don't hit enter quite yet. So in your example above, I want to call out that you sort of have two promises, but they're not nested inside of each other. And that can in certain contexts be what you want, but in this case, the data you want to get out of the response.text, you have to be inside of that first.then function callback for you to have access to response. So you can call response.text.
Say that again.
Yeah, so inside of the function callback, you have the .then, it says function response. So inside of that function, you have access to response. So if you want to call response.text, you've got to call it inside of that function. And what you typed right there, you're calling response.text outside of the function. So
all of this needs to be inside of this.
exactly. And if it's not inside of that, you don't have access to response. So therefore you can't call response.text because there's no response to call it on yet.
So to do that, I would need to go to this line and then move and then start then put it inside right there.
Exactly.
I'll do this. Oh no.
So
Okay.
if you hit the up arrow, you should be able to get back to where you were. And the trick, if you go to the end of that line where you want to put the new line, and you hit shift enter. Yeah, there we go.
I need all of this. And I'll put it. No. It doesn't go there, right? That's not where I should start.
No, that's where it goes. Yep. Yeah, just like that.
So promise then console log status and then. So all that's right.
Yep, all that looks right to me. Try hitting enter. Let's see what happens.
Oh, wow.
There we go.
Okay.
So the key thing is nesting the promises like that is really important. And if you don't do it, you're not going to be able to get the text out of the response body.
So okay, so now we did the promise, the original promise, then, and then we went in and nested the promise to with the response.text inside of that. So we got the 200 on the first one. And then in order to go back to get the promise to, we need to nest it inside of the other one.
Yep.
And so there's not a promise 3, is there?
There isn't.
Okay, so after you do the promise the second time, that's it.
In this example, yes. In theory, though, you could have as promises all the way down. You could have promise 10. You could go all the way if you wanted to. There are some techniques one can use to make it a little bit easier to read some of that stuff. But yeah.
Okay. Ooh.
So Stephanie asked, is it okay if mine still says pending? It doesn't say fulfilled like Christie's. As long as you get the logged out 200 and the body, that's totally fine. Sort of what the reason why it'll say fulfilled or pending is sort of depending on, so going back to that container analogy, imagine you've got sort of a container that contains that either contains nothing or the response. And what you're doing is you're sort of getting the container, and then you're sort of logging out the current state of it to the user right after they like synchronously after they run the function. So what's happening there is there's sort of two things that are going on that are sort of what we like to call in software what's called a race condition. You sort of have one thing where the you're sort of immediately logging out like promise fulfilled or empty or pending, that's what it's called. Or you're that's like one thing that's going on. And the other thing that's going on is a request is being made to the server. Now, if that request takes any significant amount of time, then the first thing is always going to get done first. It's always going to end up logging out promise pending because the request takes a while. The thing is, the requests we're making are short enough where it maybe could, in theory, be possible, like in Christie's example here, where you'll actually, by the time the return value of the function comes back, it actually will have already, like there already will be something in the container. So it's sort of logging out, oh, there's something in there. But it's sort of indeterminate. It could be like maybe a bunch of students are making requests to the server and your request just is getting processed last. So it takes a little bit more time. So it's not a black and white answer. It's totally fine. In practice, as long as you're getting that 200 and the sort of text contents of the body, you're good. Probably way more than you wanted to know, but hopefully that answered your question.
When you reference a container, should we think of a container as the same way we think of a container in HTML?
No, sorry, completely different thing. Like I'm talking about like a physical, like a box, or like in the real world, like a glass or a thing, a like plastic bin, like a thing that holds things, like you'd use for organization.
Okay, I just wanted to that. I didn't know if it was the same. Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing. Does Stephanie, I was wondering, did Stephanie see what she needed to see?
You're good, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'll still be around for questions, but I think we're about ready to take our break if I have calculated my times right. So if anyone's having any problems, feel free to reach out to me or Mel, and we'll try to do our best to assist you. But I think we're probably can be on break until like 7:30-ish. Does that sound right? Cool.
Yeah.
I need to do a little bit of polishing up of the homework because I need to fix a couple things. But after that, it'll be just time for us to sort of work through some of that stuff, and hopefully I can answer more questions you might have. So yeah, that's it. See you back at 7:30.
Thanks. See you at 7:30.
Yep. thing. I forgot to unpause recording. That was probably bad. I'm going to do a little walkthrough of the Google Chrome network pane. I'm going to sort of show you why it can be a really helpful tool for debugging network problems in a web browser. That'll take maybe like 5 minutes, and then the rest of it I'm going to give you back for your homework and ask Mel and I any questions you might have. Okay. So let's say I just kicked off a little request right here. Now you'll see on the top, we've got the network pane here. So you've got elements you're probably familiar with, console you're probably familiar with, but network. We're going to click on network, and what you'll see is there's a bunch of sort of controls. The main sort of interface you have though in this is a list of a bunch of requests that were made. Your list might have more than just one request in it. You might have something that looks a little bit more like this, where you've got like a bunch of stuff in here, and then maybe like one here at the bottom, this one here. But either way, any request you make in the JavaScript console is going to show up in this list at the very bottom. You can click on it, and you can see a bunch of information about the request. So you can see this is the URL we made the request to. You can see the method, the status code that it came back as. This is actually a little bit of a fancier one, but it still is an okay status code. All the headers in the response, all the headers in the request. And in addition, if there's a request body, you also see that in here. And then you can see the response body in a couple different formats. I sort of give it to you both there. And you can also see, this isn't as important for you now, but might be later on. You can also see how long the request took. So you can see, for example, here, it took in total 102 milliseconds to process our request. And most of that was waiting for the server to come back with to process the request. So this whole waiting section, 92 of those milliseconds were just the server processing a request and generating what exactly it wanted to say back to us, and then sending it back to us. So kind of interesting to think about that. The networking is just the sort of small little bits on either end. But this is often helpful because, especially with at the very end of your homework, there's a bit where you're going to be writing some code in an actual script tag. Excuse me, a script tag in an HTML page. When you're doing things where you're making a request and that request isn't right in front of you, it's often helpful to see the information about the request that's being made in DevTools and not have to like try to sort of guess what's going on based on the code. And this sort of can help as like a check to make sure the code you're writing is doing what you're expecting it should be doing. So that's all. There's a bunch of other things you can do in this panel, but I think at this point, just being able to click on requests in here, take a look around is probably going to behoove you to be helpful. So yeah. Okay. Any questions? Cool. Okay. So I should have made the assignment for tonight accessible in Canvas. So if you go in, you should be able to find it. I will also post the assignment in Slack and in Zoom, so you can access it there if you'd like, if it'd be easier. I can figure out how to do that. Where is it? Chat. There we go. Okay, there we go. And I will also go to there. So I want to call out, it's really important for this homework assignment that all the fetch requests you make, you do in the JavaScript console here. You do in the careers in code.ml in this JavaScript console right here. If you don't do them in here, you do them in another place, it's possible they're not going to work. You're going to get back something that says that the big, sort of like a big red error. It might say something about access control allow origin or a thing called cores. We're not going to talk about that right now, but just if you see any sort of big red error like that, make sure you're running these in careers and code.ml in the JavaScript console. And that should, for the most part, eliminate any sort of networking related issues there. Yeah, I think that's about it. So let me know, or me or Mel know if you have any questions. But yeah, this is what we're working on for the rest of the day today.
All right, thank you.
Did you put the link to that? Could you put the link to that in the chat?
Yep, I just did. It should also be in the Slack channel as well, the live stream C3 channel.
Thank you.
Larry, why is your face green?
I had my eyebrows and my beard went on the break.
Oh,
It's a virtual filter.
okay. Are we screenshotting these again and making a zip?
Yeah, screenshot them. I will say, going through them yesterday, it was the folks who uploaded them not in a zip and just uploaded a bunch of files. It was actually a little bit easier for me to go through. So I might prefer if people could do that, but if you upload it as a zip, that's fine too.
Oh, no, I only did the zip because you mentioned it, so I wanted to do that. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
Sorry, I just missed that. What is the preferred delivery method?
So yesterday I said zip, and then I went to grade them, and it made me download every single zip and like unzip it locally to look inside. Because you can upload multiple files, and if they're images, it's actually just easier for me if we just upload all the images, because then I can just like click through them real fast and easily see them in the browser.
Okay.
A small thing, right? In exercise 1, there's a typo in the instruction.
Oh yeah, return us some text. Good point. Let me fix that.
And then in the exercise yesterday, where we had to do the secret word, there was like, I don't know if there was like a typo in that too.
I'm not all that good at typing and catching that stuff, so thank you.
You're welcome.
So I know it says headers none, and I don't think there are any exercises that use headers. But if you do include headers in a fetch request, are they part of the options object?
Yeah. So if I go back over here to our presentation, let me find the slide here. Yeah, here we go. So there's a headers key, and it's the important thing is the value here is an object itself. So
Got it.
that inner object then contains keys and values, where the key might be like the header name and the value might be the header value.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Yep. I see you got your hand raised, Stephanie. Give me 1 second and I will let you ask your question. Okay, Stephanie, what's your question?
I'm not really sure what I'm doing, but can I share my screen? Because I went to slide 72 and wrote that, but I don't know what to do.
Okay. Yeah, share your screen.
I think you have to stop screen sharing.
That's right. Thank you. There we go.
Okay. So like I said, I went to slide 72 to see how to even start. This is what I entered the first time. Then I
Yeah.
had a couple attempts here, and then this is kind of what I'm at right now.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to take a look at something in the code you've written. Take a look at the syntax highlighting. Does it look a little bit weird to you? Like, especially around the first parameter of fetch, like that string.
Yeah, this part's, I don't know why it was green.
Yeah, I mean, if you go down below on your JavaScript console and you just type something like quote some text and another quote, like that's what a string should look like when it's syntax highlighted. It should be red like that. Or you see like where it says like method get. So for some reason that string isn't like something weird with it. So I'm going to tell you what's weird with it because I've run into this before. When you write, well, more realistically, when I write code or when I wrote the code in the Google Slides presentation, Google does this thing where it takes all the quotes you type, and after you type the quote, it replaces it with a different character. That's not actually like a quote, like the double quote that's on your keyboard. It's this weird character called a smart quote. It looks a little different than a quote. So if you hit the up arrow in your JavaScript console and you go to the first quote in that string and you select it and you type a quote on your keyboard, you see how that changed?
Oh.
Go to the other quote on the other side and do the same thing. You see now how it's red?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I tried to go through and find all the smart quotes and undo them because this is super confusing for folks. I guess I just missed a few. If you can give me the slide number that this is on, I'll go through and update it in the slide so in the future folks don't run into this, but that's what's going on. Okay, 72. Cool.
But yeah, here it just had the single one. I think I did that on my own, but I'm not sure how I did that.
Maybe like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, because I typed along with this trying to figure out how to start, but I didn't copy paste it. So, and you have a single one over here.
Maybe it was a different slide or something. I don't know. If you can figure out where it was though, let me know and I'll go through and I'll update it.
Okay.
Cool.
But this would be what you're looking for exercise 1?
I think so. Hit enter. Let's see. Looks like it worked.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Larry, you got your hand raised. Oh, you're muted though.
All right. Yeah, so I tried to do the 2A and I got this error message.
Okay.
Oh, hold on. I hope. Okay.
Your beard is.
Ah. So, okay. Just starting off here. We've got, it says 500 internal server error. What does 500 mean? Like thinking back to yesterday, status codes. What does the 5 at the beginning mean?
Not good.
Well, yeah, it means something didn't go right. But remember how we talked about there's the 4s and the 5 that sort of mean slightly different things?
So the 5 was on the server's end.
Yeah, so the 5 means something went wrong on the server's end. Yeah. Now,
Okay.
go over to the network tab. Let's take a look. So this is where this network tab is really interesting, because if you go to that request that's red there, and you go to preview at the top, you can see, yeah, okay, darn. I got to add a step to that homework assignment. So I was making some adjustments to it during the break, and this is one of those things where like I didn't go through and test it as well as I should. So the extra thing you got to do here, go back over to the JavaScript console. Add a header to this request where the key is content type, content-type. Shift enter.
You said the key is content?
You want to do headers to start with. So you need to add some headers into this request.
Headers, not catters.
And then inside of that headers object, the key you want is content, uppercase C, content dash type, uppercase T type. And then the value you want is the string text/plain. And I'm going to add this to the homework assignment so folks don't feel like you need to like memorize this right now or write this down. But I'm going to add this to the assignment.
Like hyphen,
slash, / plain. And make sure you put quotes around both the key and the value there.
Single quotes, double quotes, does it matter?
Doesn't matter, just make sure they match.
Okay. My computer's freezing.
Cool. And you also need a comma after your object between headers and data. Give that a shot. I think that'll probably work. No, it still didn't work. That's concerning. Like Tiffany, see if I can mute you here. There we go. Cool. Let me give this a shot here on my own. I want to make sure I'm giving you correct instructions here. Oh, you know what? I think I know what it is. Yeah. So, Larry, with your, can you hit the up arrow so I can see what you typed before?
Yep. So it stops freezing. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. I see what it is. You can get rid of that headers thing. That was just I thought something was wrong, but it wasn't that. We're actually good here. Go back over to the presentation slides. I think it looks like you have them open. So I ended up noticing there was a small error I said during the presentation. I wanted to actually call out after we got back, but oh, okay, you don't have the slides open. Cool. Okay, that's fine. I can share them over here too. And I apologize. I was going to call this out after we got back from our break, but I totally forgot. There was a small error I made. The key for body data isn't data, it's body.
Oh,
So
okay.
this has got to be body here. And I think if you update that for your request, it'll work.
Yep.
Cool. Sorry about that. Last cohort, we taught this with a different library that used data instead of body, and I must have not fully fixed that.
Thank you.
Yep. Stephanie, you got your hand raised.
Do you mind looking at the terminal part for the second part of exercise 1?
Sure.
I just want to make sure I'm on the right track. Oh, where's my mouse? There we go. I did this and I wasn't sure if like just apples with exclamation mark, that's what we're looking for.
That's what you're looking for.
Hey, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Wait, I have a wait a minute. I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm confused. So the first request, only because you're saying curl in the terminal, that's how we ended up in the terminal afterwards? Because the first, so we make the first one with fetch and then the second one with curl.
You make each request with fetch and then with curl. So you're making 4 requests. One is or there's two sort of exercises. You make exercise 1 with fetch and then with curl, then exercise 2 with fetch and then with curl.
Okay.
I will give you folks a hint. If you're really struggling with the curl part, you can always put it in a Postman and use Postman to generate the curl for you. Sort of cheating, but like kind of not really too. Anyway.
So my first request that I made in the careers and code.ml, it just says promise pending. It did.
Yeah.
I didn't get the apples.
Yeah, so what's happened there? Well, share your screen, we can take a look, but I would guess what's happening there is you've kicked off the request, but you haven't actually taken a look at the contents of that promise with the .then. So what's happening here is you're seeing sort of like the empty container, sort of the empty like box without any data in it. And then later on, the request is coming back and completing and putting data inside of that container, that box, that promise. But you're never actually getting notified when data goes into it. Yeah. So you sort of like initialize the request. You've sent an author request with data in it, but you're not doing anything with the response data that comes back. So that's where the whole .then thing comes in with the promises.
So this should have had the promise in embed in here too.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to sort of take the data you get back from fetch and assign that to a, well, probably the easiest way is assign it to a variable. And then that variable, then you want to call .then on it with a function, and then that function will get called once the data gets put into that promise.
Is that 72? Is that this one?
Yep. Yeah, that's a great little example right there.
Okay. All right. I got it. Thank you.
Yep. I will also bring up real quick here, Larry, I see you got your hand raised and I'll get to you in a second, but there's really no reason you have to make a variable there. Like you could do like fetch and then just the very end of it .then. Like there's no reason you have to make a promise variable. I was just making that to sort of make it more clear to you folks what's going on. But in practice, you actually don't really do that very often. Like share my screen here. What you do a lot of is things like this, where you go fetch careers in code dot ml/fruit or whatever, and you just go .then right after it like this, and then you might get like response, and then go console.log response. This is much more like the sort of code you're going to see in day-to-day web applications. But there's no real difference between this and this. It's just one happens to be across 2 lines and one's on 1 line. But anyway, Larry.
Just a small thing. How come there's no S in that sentence? The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. Like it's all the letters in the alphabet except the S.
You know, so when I made this exercise like years ago, there's a phrase that's like the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog or something like very similar to that. And the idea is it's a phrase that contains every letter in the English alphabet. And then I realized that wouldn't work all that well if the goal of my exercise is to like let you sort of like count the number of words and sort of like find words that are the same. So I like made a small modification of the phrase, there'd be 2 thes in it. So I think I removed the word that had an S in it and added a the in its place or something like that. Like it's a really bad reason.
All right. I was wondering. I'm like, I counted. I'm like, okay, about twice. I'm like, there's no S. All right.
Yeah, I say you can pick your own phrase if you want, so you're welcome to do that.
Ryan, you might have already answered this, but if you define promise with, not with var, is it let because the contents of it change?
You can actually make it a const if you want. So
Again,
the promise itself, the sort of wrapping sort of container doesn't change, but the stuff inside of it does. And the way const works, what JavaScript's actually saying is not going to change. It's just the highest level reference of the thing you're defining there. So stuff inside can change. It's just that highest level reference. So for that
okay.
reason, const is totally cool.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you.
And for the fetch, are we trying to print out the results or just the 200 is good?
So I forgot if I said anything in there. I may have not. Yeah, it doesn't look like I did. I would say if you can print them both out, especially for exercise 2, there's actually a meaningful response body there that has some data in it. For the part C of exercise 2, you're going to sort of need to print out the response body there. So that part you definitely are going to have to do it in. Does that make sense?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
So do we have to wrap that? I know before we did like 2 promises.
Yep.
Is that necessary for this to print it out?
Yeah, if you want to print out the response body, you've got to use 2 promises.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'm guessing you're working on part C. And if you're working on part C, you're definitely going to need 2 promises.
I'm working on part A.
Or part A. Okay, cool.
How do you remember all of this?
Daily use in a professional context.
Okay, because I'm over here trying to think like, okay, do I write this down? Do I put this, where do I put this information? Do I take notes? Like, I don't know what's the best way is I have like a million notebooks already.
I would say it's different for every person. For me, I'm not one where I take a lot of notes. I prefer to sort of just do it over and over and over until I just start to absorb it. That obviously takes a lot of time, and a program like this, that maybe is not a technique you can really use as much. I would say though, with this stuff in particular, I think there's the notes Mel's been putting together, at least yesterday, they looked really good. That might be a good place to start. I'm guessing, Mel, you're going to put something similar together for today that's equally as awesome.
Thanks.
Yes, I will, but it won't be in Slack. You can find it in Canvas and under the resources.
Cool. Okay.
Also, just random, this for Larry. You had airdropped me the eloquent of JavaScript, and for some reason it didn't sync up. So whenever we're in person again or around again, could you send me that again?
Yes.
Thank you.
Check your files though, or what did you use to open it?
Kindle.
And it's not in your Kindle library?
I
Okay.
can't find it anymore. It's like it just I don't know if I just might have opened it and I think I left it open, but I didn't do anything with it on my iPad. So when I went to go to it, it wasn't there anymore.
All right, no problem.
Have any of you folks found any good programming books so far that you've gotten into?
I'm reading the Eloquent JavaScript.
Cool.
A bunch of programming books. I just haven't read them. It's Stephanie, you
Yeah.
guys read.
Just the W3 schools, just sticking to Code Academy. I mean, what is the other one? Free Code Camp. That is
Yep.
it.
I've been reading, I was reading MDN about JavaScript. And then I found this JavaScript cheat sheet and it has everything written out. So it's kind of like a reference.
Nice. Stephanie, you got your hand raised.
Yes, can I share again? I'm messing
Yeah.
up in terminal.
For sure.
So I was in the middle of trying to fix this over here. Oh no, what did I do?
Okay.
So I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong or there's a couple attempts here.
Yeah, it largely looks good to me. Can you try this? Can you type clear in the terminal? And then hit enter, and then hit the up arrow. Hit the up arrow one more time. And then hit enter. Okay.
It's missing post after the -X, but I already did that before and it also gave me an error.
Try adding -X. That's or try adding post. Sorry, that's an important parameter to include.
So curl -X, and then that's where I put post.
Yep.
Okay. And then everything else just
Yeah.
and then still include the website.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ryan, can you show again how you add promise to when you get the response from promise one?
Yeah. Let me share my screen here. So there's a really good slide in the presentation that has this. Let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, here we go. Slide 73. Something like this. So the key thing is this red text here is indented within this outer promise. Because response here, you only have access to response within that promise.
Okay, yep.
So you can only access it here. You can't access response like down here, for example. Does that make sense? Oh,
Yes, it does. And so what is response text? That it's not something that comes in with response. It's it calls out for something else.
yeah, so this is a bit of a weird thing about fetch, like a weird intricacy about fetch. And that's when it wants to decode the body, that's an asynchronous operation as well, the response body. So performing the request response sort of operation itself is asynchronous. And then on top of that, then parsing the responsive body is also asynchronous. And in practice, it could be represented as synchronous. Like, it probably doesn't take all that long, but I think they chose to represent it as asynchronous because it can take a long time. So they sort of built it in that way so that you're not blocking that main thread for an inordinate amount of time in the case where, like, you've got a really big body you're parsing.
Okay.
But
Thank
it
you.
is a little bit weird. I do
Yeah,
have to, yeah,
that part had me confused, but that makes more sense.
cool. Christy, you've got your hand raised.
Yes. Okay. So my question is, I'm back on slides 55 and 56. So when I tried to do, and I'm still on the first exercise. When I tried to do the curl exercise, so I did the curl, then I did the capital X, and then I did get, then I did the lowercase d optional request body. I need the V at the end.
You're looking at 56.
Yeah. and
So I didn't mention -v. I think I included in this example here. You don't need -v at the end. If you specify -v, it tells curl to print out a lot more debugging information, which sometimes can be helpful. But for this, it's not that important.
So, okay, so I'm gonna share my screen because I
Yep.
got a no URL specified. Oh, wait.
Okay. Yeah, let's take a look.
See.
Okay. Okay. Curl-x get. So a couple things. First of all, when you're making a get request, you don't normally include a body in that request. So
I don't need to get.
say that again.
I don't need get.
Well, you're making a get request. Curl does default that parameter to be get, so you could remove it if you wanted to. But the more important thing here is you're trying to make a get request and also include a request body. And get requests are the only, like, the kind of requests that don't include request bodies.
So I don't need optional request body.
Correct. Yeah, you want to get rid of that part.
All right, let's try this again. So I'm gonna remove this.
You're gonna have to use your arrow keys in the terminal and navigate around, unfortunately.
Oh. So even to delete, I shouldn't.
Yeah, so if you hit your left arrow key a few times, you can move over there to where the single quote is.
I see what you mean. Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit tedious, and there's some other ways you can make it a little easier, but that's the easiest way to explain offhand. Yep, you want to get rid of all the -d and the single quote and all that stuff.
Oh, all of that. So then it's just curl X get and that's it.
Yep. There we go.
Oh, okay. So and while I have you here,
yeah.
So how would I have done this in here in Postman? Can we do that again?
How would you have generated a curl from Postman?
Yes.
So on the right-hand sidebar, there's like a vertical sidebar. At the very top icon, there's an I. And then below that, there's a little like closing HTML tag thing. Yeah, click that. Right there. So,
how did it get there? Oh, because I put it in here.
Yep, exactly.
And
so
then
you can see the curl that was generated there is a little bit different from what you typed. -- request is the fancier version of -x, but basically the same thing.
Okay. I'm gonna screenshot all of this and send it to you. I did it. I want extra points for this.
Cool. Well, while you got it open, let me show you one other cool little trick. You see a little gear next to curl? So it's like the options, yeah, that right there. Click on that. And see where there's that option, use long form options.
No, how do I get rid of it?
Just click
In
end
lesson?
lesson. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So the second option from the top, use long form options. On the right, flip that to be off.
Okay.
And now close that thing.
Oh, and then it's doing the same thing as the terminal.
Yeah. So
But what's
that's
the L?
what's the L?
Uh-huh.
I think the L means follow redirects, which is another sort of fancy option. That's not all that important for what we're doing today. We're going to talk a little bit about redirects tomorrow, though, and sort of what that means.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Shantina, you've got your hand raised.
Yes, I've been writing that curl line. I've wrote it about 20 times. I've written it about 20 times, and I'm not sure what I'm doing for the first. I'm not sure what's wrong. Is it okay if I share my screen?
For sure. Yeah, let's take a look.
Okay. I keep getting the unexpected identifier, and I just keep trying different things.
Here's you're writing this curl in a JavaScript console. Curl is a tool you can use to make requests in a terminal, not a JavaScript console.
Oh my goodness. I'm sorry.
No problem at all. If you take what you typed right there, the most recent one, you copy that, you open up the terminal and you paste that in there, I bet it's just going to work.
Ew, what is this? How do I clear? Do I just type clear, did you say?
Yep, yeah, you can type clear, you can hit Control L. Okay. I don't know if that.
See? It's me. It's just me. All right. So I'll just it was curl dash x and then apple. Oh my goodness. I could not figure out what was going on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Sign.
Stephanie, I think you got your hand raised, and Shantina, you still have your hand raised. I think that's a mistake, though.
Does anybody want to go before me?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so my mistake was that I was in a console and not a terminal.
Yeah, you were in the browser JavaScript console, not a terminal.
Okay, so then I had taken the directions literally then. At the beginning, it says make all the requests in a JavaScript console.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Okay, so that was my mistake.
That was a little too literal. Yeah, that I probably could clarify those instructions. I apologize on that.
No, that's just if I would have just did what everybody else was doing, then I would have been okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Y'all go ahead.
Cool. Stephanie.
Okay, sorry, I'm gonna share one more time.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm stuck on oh, where's my mouse? Stuck on part C of the third exercise. It says there's an error on 16, but I'm not sure. Not sure what I'm looking at.
Yeah, so let's sort of walk through what's going on here, step by step through that script tag. Maybe as I sort of talk through it, it'll sort of make sense what's going on here. So sort of starting on line 11 there of your file, you're making a request to that endpoint. It's a post request. It's got some body contents to it. And you're calling fetch, that fetch function, which is going to make that HTTP request. Okay, you call it, and then you take the return value from fetch, and you kind of just ignore it. You don't do anything with it. Okay, Then you go down to line 16, and then you find a variable called promise. And it kind of explodes because there's no variable called promise defined. And that's sort of what happens. So having me have walked through that, does that sort of make sense? Like why this sort of error you're seeing in the console over there? Like, does that error make sense now? We still have to talk through maybe like why it's happening, but does it sort of like follow sort of step by step what's going on?
Not really.
Okay. Let's do this. Take everything from line 16 to the end of the script tag and comment it out. One trick to do that is if you select all the text from line 16 to line 23 and you hit Command/.
Hey, okay, cool.
Cool. Save that and reload your web page. Also, I love that you guys actually have it running as a local web server. That's awesome. I didn't realize you guys were going to do that.
I wasn't sure what to do, so I was like, does he mean in VS Code or? So,
well, okay. So now we don't see an error anymore in JavaScript console. So that's some degree of change. That's probably kind of good. Go over to the network pane though in DevTools. Take a look in there and see if we see the request happening, getting kicked off. Yeah, it looks like there's a row there. It says most common word on it. So click on that maybe. Okay, it's a post. So the status code was 200. Okay, so it looks like things are generally in a good direction here. It looks like the request is being kicked off correctly. So in other words, lines 11 through 14 of your code seem like they're okay. Seem like they're doing the right thing. Would you agree?
yeah.
Okay. Now, here's the problem. From line 11 to 14, you're running that code, but the return value of that fetch, you're not really storing in anything. So you don't really have a way by which you can access like that sort of promise container and later on do something like get the data out of the response or get the response data out of the promise. And the reason why is you're calling fetch, but you're doing nothing with the return value. And it's really important that you do something with that return value, store it in a variable or sort of call then on it immediately.
I'm not sure how to do that.
Okay, well, let's think about it this way. Let me go back over to sharing my screen. All right, or well, do you by chance have the slides open somewhere on your computer?
One more.
Cool. Okay. Take a look at this example here. In particular, the first 3 lines. Maybe you can take those first 3 lines and copy them and paste them over into your code over in VS Code. Like maybe below line 14. Yeah, something like that. And fix the indentation on that. What looks different between the code you just pasted and the code that you wrote, other than the obvious like URL differences and method and body and all that? Like,
you're saying it's a variable?
At the very beginning of that, we've got var promise equals.
Yeah.
So, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no. JavaScript was definitely one of my weak points. So I am like, it's making sense, but it's like a slow.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, no problem at all. For what it's worth, I have a feeling probably other folks are getting a lot of this right now, so I'm more than willing to spend the time. But so why is that var promise equals beginning important? Well, when you call a function, you're sort of running something and getting sort of a return value out of that function. And that return value is sort of an expression you can do anything sort of you want with. I would imagine Max has mentioned this concept of an expression to you guys, right? Maybe, hopefully. that phrase, expression mean anything? Okay. I wonder if we maybe use another word, but that's like, I feel like what everyone calls them. Okay.
Like variable equals something,
Or
or is it the thing on the right side is the expression?
the thing on the right side is the expression. Yeah, so an expression is sort of any sort of anything that evaluates to be a value. So an example expression could be 1 + 2. It could be 1. It could be the text string hello world. It could be the text string quote hello quote plus the text string quote world quote. Anything that sort of evaluates when sort of run through the JavaScript interpreter and results in a sort of value you can do something with. So there's no reason, like you can run something that evaluates into an expression and sort of disregard the result. That's totally fine. It tends to be not something you do all that often, because usually when you evaluate an expression, part of the goal is to take the thing and do something with it, because you sort of put in the work to compute the thing. So like you usually want to do something with it, but you don't have to. So that what you're doing there, Stephanie, on line 11 to 14, is you're sort of running this fetch function and calculating a result. In this case, the result happens to be a promise that later on will be filled with data about the response. But you're computing a value and you're not doing anything with it. You're sort of just like disregarding it because you're not storing it in any sort of variable or any sort of value. Because you're not storing it anywhere, it means you can't then later attach a .then to the promise to do something with it. So in this case, because you want to later on look at the data that's coming back from the request, that response data that's coming back, you have to be able to attach a .then to the promise that is returned by fetch. And the only way you can do that, or well, the only way we've talked about, there's other ways, but the only way that we've talked about doing it is you need to set fetch, the return value from fetch, store that return value into a variable of some sort. So then later on, you can sort of interrogate it and attach the .then to it. Does that make sense?
Yes. But then for this part, so all this, I'm assuming would have to match the text processing most common word, and I would also write method and body down here. So it matches?
Yep.
Okay. All right, let me give that a shot. I'll let someone else take a turn, but thank you.
Cool. I think you're well on your way, by the way. Other than this, that little detail, everything's looking generally good here. So
sweet. Thank you.
Yep.
But that's how you know we're really into it, because class is over and we are still here.
Yeah.
I'm going to run. Thank you and have a great night, everybody.
Yeah. You too.
Good night.
Ryan, before I go, can you tell me where is the link to the slide deck?
Yeah, I posted it in Slack yesterday. Let me post it one more time.
Oh, I was looking for today in Slack. I didn't.
It's the same slide deck for the whole week, or the whole time I'm teaching.
Gotcha.
Mel just posted it in the chat too, by the way.
Thank you.
One last quick question. For body, you said use body, right? And it wasn't data?
It's body, not data. That should be updated in the presentation as well.
Yeah. Yes, I just wasn't, I didn't see it wrong, so I don't know if it was right or wrong.
Cool.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna keep plugging away. Thank you for all today.
Have a good evening, folks. I'll see you tomorrow.
Good night, y'all.
Thanks, Mel, too.
Yeah.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.